Aria Jenkins moved through Camp Lejeune's infantry training grounds like a shadow, silent and determined yet constantly overlooked. At 26, she had mastered the art of being underestimated, her 5-foot frame always imperfectly maintained uniform, her dark hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her green eyes focused straight ahead, avoiding unnecessary attention. The male recruits called her Tiny Tim behind her back, though her actual name was Lieutenant Aria Jenkins, one of the first women to attempt joining the Marine Corps' infantry officer program. After combat roles opened to females, they said she was too weak for the infantry, too small, too fragile, too female, and expected her to wash out any day. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Aria arrived at the training field each morning at 0500, 30 minutes before required, to run extra miles, push through additional sets of pull-ups, and practice land navigation alone. She worked with methodical determination, a disciplined figure in standard issue PT gear who never complained, never faltered, and never responded to the whispered comments or skeptical glances. The officers who bothered to notice her at all saw what they expected to see: a woman trying to prove something, likely to fail when real pressure hit. Some instructors were professional, evaluating her on performance alone. Others seemed to take pride in highlighting her struggles with the heaviest equipment loads. Lieutenant Tiny Tim strikes again, Captain Michael Foster would say when Aria completed an obstacle just seconds within time. Requirements. His voice carrying just enough doubt to make nearby officers smirk. Let's see how long she lasts. In actual combat conditions, Aria never responded to these comments. She learned long ago that some battles weren't worth fighting, especially when you had bigger objectives ahead. She'd complete the courses, carry the loads, file the reports, and return to her barracks where she'd spend evenings studying infantry tactics and battle strategies while others socialized. What none of them knew, what none of them could have guessed, was that Aria Jenkins was the daughter of Colonel Sarah Iron Lady Jenkins, one of the most decorated female military police officers in Army history. 3 Bronze Stars, a Silver Star for valor during a Baghdad ambush where she led 15 soldiers to safety under heavy fire, and a reputation for physical and mental toughness that made hardened veterans stand at attention. Aria wore her mother's silver compass on her dog tags every day, a simple tool that had guided Sarah Jenkins through countless missions across 3 conflicts. She'd inherited more than just the compass when Sarah died of breast cancer 2 years ago. She'd inherited 20 years of resilience, a work ethic that transformed her 5-foot frame into a machine of functional strength and precision that extended into every aspect of her training. But she'd also inherited her mother's burden, being a woman in a system that still questioned if females belonged in combat, still measured them against different standards, still expected them to fail. After her mother's funeral, Aria had left her promising position in military intelligence. For years of military service, specializing in threat assessment, with commendations that suggested a bright future, all of it felt meaningless without her mother there to witness her success. When combat roles finally opened to women, Aria transferred to infantry training, determined to prove that her mother's legacy of breaking barriers could continue. The infantry training program was grueling by design: extreme physical demands, sleep deprivation, and psychological pressure intended to weed out those who couldn't handle combat's realities. The irony wasn't lost on her that she'd ended up fighting the same battles her mother had faced decades earlier, surrounded by men who saw her as nothing more than a political experiment, a disruption to their brotherhood. But anonymity had its advantages. Nobody asked probing questions about her background. Nobody connected her to the legendary Iron Lady. Nobody suspected that the quiet lieutenant completing minimum requirements could deadlift twice her body weight and had survived a brutal mugging in Virginia where she'd hospitalized 2 attackers. Aria's modest apartment off base reflected her carefully cultivated ordinary life: military manuals, tactical study materials, a few photographs of her mother in dress uniform, and locked in a footlocker rarely open, her mother's Medal of Valor, awarded posthumously for an operation that remained partially classified. She maintained it respectfully, but kept it hidden. That part of her mother's legacy was too painful to display openly. The first sign that Aria's carefully constructed invisibility was about to shatter came during a rainy March morning. 3 weeks into the Advanced Infantry Officer course, Staff Sergeant James Rodriguez, a combat-hardened veteran with multiple deployments, was leading a punishing 12-mile forced march with full combat loads. The rain had turned the trail into a muddy obstacle course, and male officers had already fallen out with injuries. "This is what real combat feels like, ladies," Rodriguez shouted as they slogged through ankle-deep mud. Enemy doesn't care about your comfort. Weather doesn't care about your plans. Aria pushed forward, her 60-pound pack digging into her shoulders, her boots slipping in the treacherous terrain. She positioned herself in the middle of the formation, not leading, not trailing, just steady and unremarkable. For miles in, the rain intensified, reducing visibility and turning small water crossings into genuine challenges. At mile 7, disaster struck. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was crossing a rain-swollen creek when the temporary footbridge, really just a series of secured logs, shifted unexpectedly. Time seemed to slow as Aria watched him pitch sideways, his heavy pack throwing him off balance. She registered everything automatically: trajectory, landing point, the sharp rocks barely visible through the churning water. Rodriguez hit hard, a sickening crack audible even over the rain as his leg twisted at an unnatural angle, his head striking a rock before he rolled into deeper water. Aria was moving before anyone else reacted, dropping her pack and cutting through the Russian water with powerful, economical strokes. Her movements weren't flashy or panicked, just ruthlessly efficient swimming techniques learned during countless water survival courses. She reached Rodriguez in seconds, finding him semi-conscious and already being pulled downstream. Without hesitation, she secured a grip under his arms, kept his head above water, and fought the current to drag him toward the bank. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "I need a medical kit and help stabilizing his leg," she called, her voice cutting through the chaos without shouting. Now, the other officers snapped into action, rushing to assist as Aria performed a rapid trauma assessment with practiced precision. Compound fracture of the tibia, possible concussion, risk of hypothermia in the cold rain. Working methodically, she applied a makeshift splint using equipment from her pack, stabilized his neck, and covered him with an emergency blanket from her gear. "Did you serve as a medic?" Rodriguez asked, his voice tight with pain but suddenly respectful. "No," Aria replied, checking his pupils for signs of concussion. "Just prepared." The nearest vehicle access point was 10 miles away. The satellite phone was getting no signal in the storm. Rodriguez needed immediate medical attention. The bone break was severe, with risk of vascular damage if not properly treated soon. The rain continued to pour, reducing visibility and making helicopter evacuation impossible. "We need to get him to the extraction point," Aria said, her mind already calculating options. "His leg can't handle the terrain, and a stretcher carry with this mud would be too slow and risky." The other officers looked at each other uncertainly. Even with 4 men rotating, carrying Rodriguez's 220-pound frame plus gear through this terrain would be brutally difficult. Before anyone could formulate a plan, Aria was already moving, efficiently redistributing gear, creating a secure harness system using ropes from her pack. "Lieutenant Jenkins, what are you doing?" Captain Foster asked, watching her preparations with confusion. "Getting the staff sergeant to medical care," she replied simply, finishing her improvised carrying system. With quick, practiced movements, she secured Rodriguez across her shoulders in a modified fireman's carry that distributed his weight optimally while stabilizing his injured leg. "This is insane," Foster said. "You can't possibly carry him." Aria met his eyes directly for the first time in weeks. "With respect, sir, watch me." With Rodriguez secured across her shoulders, Aria began moving forward, her steps careful but deliberate. The other officers stared in disbelief as this woman they dismissed as too small, too weak, too female began carrying a man nearly twice her size through punishing terrain. Her face showed no strain, her breathing remained controlled, and her progress, while slow, was steady and purposeful. "The rest of you secure the training area and follow with the equipment," she ordered, her voice carrying an unmistakable tone of command. That brooked no argument. "Mark the trail clearly. I'm taking the most direct route to the extraction point." For the first mile, several officers followed close behind, expecting her to collapse or request assistance. But as Aria maintained her pace, navigating the difficult terrain with Rodriguez secured firmly across her shoulders, they fell back, stunned by what they were witnessing. This wasn't just unexpected strength, this was extraordinary endurance and determination that defied everything they'd assumed about her capabilities. "How are you doing this?" Rodriguez asked, his voice tight with pain but tinged with amazement as they crossed the 2-mile mark, without Aria breaking stride. "One step at a time, Staff Sergeant," she replied, her voice steady despite the immense effort. "My mother carried wounded soldiers through Fallujah under fire. This is just mud and rain." Hour after hour, Aria pushed forward, navigating by compass and memory through increasingly difficult terrain. The rain eventually stopped, but left behind treacherous mud and swollen streams. She adjusted Rodriguez's position regularly to prevent pressure injuries, checked his vitals, and maintained a steady pace that prioritized stability over speed. She didn't speak often, conserving energy, but when Rodriguez's pain increased, she distracted him with quiet stories of tactical scenarios, asking his opinion on approach strategies. By mile 8, Aria's uniform was caked with mud, her muscles burning with fatigue. But her determination never wavered. She had entered a state of focused endurance that elite athletes and special operators recognize, where the mind overrides. The body's protest through sheer willpower. The physical pain was immense. But Aria had trained for this moment her entire life, building not just strength but the mental fortitude to push beyond normal human limitations. "We're going to make it, Staff Sergeant," she said during a brief rest to check his injured leg. 2 more miles, the extraction team should be waiting. Rodriguez looked at her with newfound respect. "Who are you really, Lieutenant?" Aria adjusted her grip, secured the makeshift splint, and rose again, lifting his substantial weight back onto her shoulders in a smooth, practiced movement. Just an infantry officer doing her job. The final 2 miles tested Aria beyond anything in her training. Each step became an act of will, each breath a conscious decision to continue, rather than collapse. But she had made a promise, to herself, to her mother's memory, and now to Rodriguez, and she would not fail. When the extraction point finally came into view, with emergency vehicles waiting, Aria didn't break stride or call for help. She carried Rodriguez the entire way, only relinquishing him directly to the medical team. 10 miles, the medic said, checking his GPS as they transferred Rodriguez to a stretcher. "You carried him 10 miles through that terrain, alone?" Aria didn't respond, already focused on providing the medical team with precise details about Rodriguez's condition, the timing of the injury, the treatments she'd administered. Her uniform was saturated with mud and sweat, her hands shaking slightly from exhaustion. But her report was detailed and professional. It was only after Rodriguez was safely in the ambulance that Aria finally allowed herself to sit down, muscles trembling from the extraordinary effort. Captain Foster arrived with the rest of the team nearly an hour later, his expression a mixture of disbelief and reassessment as he approached Aria. "The medical team says you likely saved his leg, possibly his career. They've never seen a casualty evacuation like that. How did you do it?" Aria looked up, meeting his gaze with the quiet confidence of someone who no longer needed to hide her capabilities. "Training, sir. Proper technique can compensate for size differences." "That wasn't just technique," Foster said, shaking his head. "I've never seen anything like it from any infantry officer, male or female." As the team regrouped at the extraction point, word of Aria's feat spread quickly. The officers who had dismissed her for months now looked at her with a mixture of respect, curiosity, and confusion. The woman they'd called Tiny Tim, the lieutenant they'd expected to wash out, had just completed a casualty evacuation that would have challenged their strongest men. "Lieutenant Tiny Tim is full of surprises," one officer said, but this time without mockery. That night, back at base after medical evaluation confirmed she'd suffered no lasting injuries despite her extraordinary effort, Aria sat alone in her quarters, rubbing the deep bruises on her shoulders where Rodriguez's weight had pressed for hours. Her mother's compass lay on the desk beside her, the small tool that had guided her through the challenging terrain when visibility was poor. For the first time in months, Aria felt something beyond the grim determination that had driven her since her mother's death, a sense of having honored Sarah Jenkins' legacy in a way that went beyond merely following in her footsteps. Her phone buzzed with a message from an unknown number. "They told me what you did. No one's going to call you to weak again. Thank you for saving my career." Aria stared at the message, then at her mother's compass, then at the photo on her desk showing Sarah Jenkins receiving her silver star. "What would you say now, Mom?" she whispered to the empty room. The answer came to her in her mother's voice, clear as if she were sitting beside her sometimes. "Sweetheart, the only way to change minds is to do what they believe is impossible." Aria closed her eyes and made a decision. She'd given anonymity a chance, tried to prove herself by quietly meeting standards and avoiding attention. But maybe her mother's approach had been right all along. Sometimes you had to shine so brightly they couldn't ignore you, had to be so exceptional that their prejudice had nowhere to hide. Rodriguez's injury had forced her hand, but perhaps it was time to step fully into the light and show everyone exactly who Lieutenant Aria Jenkins really was. The story of Aria's extraordinary evacuation spread through Camp Lejeune like wildfire. By morning, everyone from junior enlisted to senior officers had heard about the female lieutenant who carried a staff sergeant 10 miles through punishing terrain. Many embellished the story, adding details about impossible weather conditions or claiming she'd fought off wildlife along the way. The truth was impressive enough without exaggeration. Aria's approach to the sudden attention was characteristically disciplined. She continued her regular training schedule, arrived early for PT as always, and maintained the same focused professionalism that had defined her time at Camp Lejeune. The difference was in how others responded to her. Instructors who had previously ignored her now watched her technique closely. Officers who had dismissed her capabilities now sought her input during tactical exercises. The nickname Tiny Tim vanished overnight, replaced by whispered references to the carrier. Lieutenant Jenkins, her commanding officer, Major Thompson, said during morning formation, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez is recovering well. The medical team says your evacuation technique prevented vascular complications. That could have resulted in amputation. Well done. Aria accepted the unexpected praise with a simple thank you, sir. But inside, something had shifted. The incident with Rodriguez had revealed a crack in her carefully constructed facade, and there was no resealing it now. She could feel the change in how people looked at her, not with dismissal or skepticism, but with a new curiosity about what else they might have missed. Captain Foster approached her after the formation dispersed. His typical smugness was replaced with something that resembled professional respect. Jenkins, that was impressive work out there. Rodriguez's doctor wants to talk to you about your evacuation techniques. They're saying your improvised splint prevented nerve damage. I'm happy to discuss it with them, sir, Aria replied, maintaining her characteristic reserve. Where did you learn those skills? That wasn't standard infantry training. Aria hesitated, carefully considering how much to reveal. For months, she kept her background compartmentalized, separating her mother's legacy from her current path. But perhaps it was time for selective transparency. My mother was military, sir. She made sure I understood field medicine from an early age. Foster nodded, studying her with newfound interest. Well, whatever she taught you saved Rodriguez's career. He's requesting you visit him at the hospital when you get a chance. The hospital visit wasn't something Aria had anticipated, but she went the following evening after completing her training responsibilities. Rodriguez was in a private room, his leg elevated and secured in a complex external fixation device that held the shattered bones in alignment. Lieutenant Jenkins, he said when she entered, his voice markedly different from the harsh instructor tone she'd grown accustomed to. They told me you carried me 10 miles. I remember parts of it, but with the concussion, just doing my job, Staff Sergeant. Rodriguez shook his head. No. What you did goes way beyond the job. The surgeon said if you hadn't stabilized my leg the way you did, if you hadn't gotten me to medical care so quickly, I might have lost it. He gestured to the fixator. They're saying I'll make a full recovery. I'll be able to return to active duty eventually. Aria nodded, uncomfortable with the gratitude. That's good to hear. I owe you an apology. Rodriguez continued, his expression serious. I made assumptions about your capabilities. I was wrong. The admission clearly cost him. And Aria recognized the significance of a senior NCO acknowledging such an error to a junior office. That's diplomatic of you, Rodriguez said with a wry smile. But we both know I was harder on you than the others. I thought you were just checking boxes, trying to prove something about women. In combat roles, Aria met his gaze directly. I'm trying to prove something, Staff Sergeant. That qualification should be based on capability, not gender. That standards matter, not stereotypes. After what you did, I don't think anyone's questioning your capabilities anymore. Rodriguez shifted slightly, wincing at the movement. The hospital staff keeps asking me questions about you. Apparently, carrying someone my size for that distance is something even their most physically imposing orderlies wouldn't attempt. Proper technique matters more than size, Aria said, repeating what her mother had taught her for years. That's what I keep telling them, but they're not buying it, Rodriguez replied. Word spreading. Jenkins, people are asking questions about who you really are. The warning was clear, and Aria felt a familiar tension settle between her shoulders. Her carefully maintained anonymity was evaporating. I'm just an infantry officer doing my job. Rodriguez's expression suggested he didn't believe that simplified version for a moment. Well, this infantry instructor is grateful you were there, whatever else you might be. As Aria left the hospital, she recognized that a new phase had begun. The relative invisibility she'd cultivated was gone. Now she would need to manage the growing attention while still focusing on her primary mission, completing infantry officer training on her own merits. The scrutiny intensified over the following weeks. Other instructors began watching her more closely during physical training, noting the methodical way she approached each exercise. The perfect form she maintained even under fatigue, the composed breathing techniques that allowed her to recover more quickly than her peers. During tactical exercises, her suggested approaches, previously ignored, were now considered seriously, often revealing strategic insights that indicated extensive study and unconventional thinking. The comment started small. Jenkins is different, she overheard one instructor tell another. She moves like someone with special operations training. Aria tried to adjust, to find a new balance between demonstrating her genuine capabilities and avoiding unwanted attention, but each day brought new challenges. During a particularly grueling obstacle course, she completed the route 30 seconds faster than any other officer, male or female, using techniques that suggested years of specialized training. "Where did you learn to move like that?" Major Thompson asked afterward, his professional curiosity evident. "I've always been athletic, sir," Aria replied, the partial truth easier than explaining about the backyard obstacle courses her mother had built. The weekend challenges where Sarah Jenkins had timed her daughter while calling out tactical scenarios, training her from childhood to think and move like an operator. The true turning point came during the advanced weapons qualification. The infantry officers were evaluating on multiple weapon systems, from the standard M for carbine to the heavier M40 machine gun. Aria had deliberately maintained middle of the pack performance in previous qualifications, demonstrating competence without exceptional skill. But something changed that day as she handled the familiar weight of the M4, feeling the ghost of her mother's hands adjusting her grip, correcting her stance. "Remember, shooting is just physics and patience," Sarah had told her during those long weekends at the range. "Understand the tool, control your body, respect the mathematics of the bullet's journey," without consciously deciding to excel. Aria found herself in a familiar zone of concentration, her breathing synchronized with her heartbeat, her focus narrowing to the perfect marriage of sight picture and trigger control. When the qualification ended, she had scored expert on every weapon system, with groupings so tight on the M for targets that the range master inspected her target twice. Thinking multiple shooters had used the same paper, Jenkins, Captain Foster, said, examining her target with poorly concealed astonishment, "Have you been holding back on us?" The question hung in the air, laden with implications. Had she been deliberately underperforming? Was she some kind of ringer placed in the program to prove a point? The other officers gathered around, examining her targets with expressions ranging from admiration to suspicion. "I had a good day, sir," Aria replied, the simplicity of her answer contrasting with the complexity of emotions behind it. She had, in fact, been holding back, moderating her performance to avoid exactly this kind of scrutiny. But her mother's training ran deep to be completely suppressed, and in moments of focus, the years of precision practice emerged naturally. That evening, as Aria cleaned her assigned weapon with the meticulous attention to detail that characterized everything she did, Major Thompson approached her workspace. A word in private, "Lieutenant Jenkins?" In his office, Thompson closed the door and studied her for a long moment before speaking. "I've been reviewing your service record. For years in military intelligence, excellent evaluations, then a sudden transfer request to infantry when combat roles open to women." Aria maintained her composure, though internally she recognized the beginning of the unraveling she'd feared. "Yes, sir. What your record doesn't show is any explanation for the level of tactical proficiency you've been demonstrating. The weapons qualification today, the casualty evacuation with Rodriguez, the navigation skills, the physical capabilities, none of that comes from standard training pipelines." "I take my preparations seriously, sir." Thompson's expression remained neutral, but his eyes reflected a deeper understanding. "Jenkins, I'm going to ask you something directly, and I'd appreciate an honest answer. Are you related to Colonel Sarah Jenkins, the Iron Lady?" The question shouldn't have surprised her. The military community was small, and exceptional performers were remembered. Still, hearing her mother's name and call sign spoken aloud in this context sent an unexpected surge of emotion through her. "She was my mother, sir." Thompson nodded, a piece falling into place. "I served under her command briefly in Iraq. One of the most formidable officers I've ever encountered. Her unit had the highest survival rate in the theater because she personally trained every soldier in advanced combat medicine and tactical movement." He paused, studying Aria with new understanding. "She must have started training you very young." "As soon as I could walk, sir," Aria admitted, the admission both a relief and a vulnerability. She believed preparation began in childhood, and you've been trying to make your own way, without trading on her reputation or connections. "Yes, sir. I wanted to earn my place based on my own merits." Thompson considered this admirable, but perhaps misguided in execution. by concealing your capabilities. You've created more questions than if you'd simply performed to your actual potential from the beginning. The observation struck closer to home than Aria wanted to admit. Her attempt to avoid special treatment had instead created a situation where her sudden demonstration of exceptional skills appeared suspicious. The infantry officer program isn't about proving you can meet minimum standards, Jenkins. It's about developing leaders who can excel under the most challenging conditions imaginable. By holding back, you've deprived your fellow officers of the opportunity to learn from your expertise, and you've deprived yourself of the chance to grow beyond your current capabilities. Aria absorbed this perspective, recognizing the truth in it. Her mother had never hidden her abilities, she had demonstrated them openly, forcing the system to recognize her value, despite its prejudices, and trying to forge a different path. Had Aria actually dishonored that legacy? What would you suggest, sir? Stop hiding, Thompson said simply. Your mother's reputation might open some doors, but it's your performance that will determine if you belong. The Corps needs exceptional officers, regardless of gender or family connections. After the meeting with Thompson, Aria returned to her quarters and opened the footlocker she'd kept locked for so long. Inside, beyond her mother's Medal of Valor, lay a leather-bound journal, Sarah Jenkins' tactical notebook, containing decades of hard-won wisdom about leadership, combat, and navigating the military as a woman who refused to be limited by others' expectations. Aria had read it countless times but had been reluctant to apply its most fundamental lesson. Excellence cannot be hidden without cost. By trying to be unremarkable, she had actually drawn more attention than if she'd simply performed to her capabilities from the beginning. The next morning, Aria approached her training with a new mindset. During the 12-mile ruck march, she set a pace at the front of the formation rather than hiding in the middle. When the tactical problem involved a complex ambush scenario, she offered solutions that reflected her mother's unconventional thinking, rather than providing textbook answers. During physical training, she pushed to her actual limits rather than artificially capping her performance. The change was immediately noticeable to instructors and fellow officers alike. Some responded with respect, others with renewed skepticism. The whispers evolved from dismissive comments about her size to questions about her background. "I heard she's Sarah Jenkins' daughter," became a common refrain, often followed by, "That explains a lot." Captain Foster, who had been her most vocal critic, now watched her with a complex mixture of respect and defensiveness. During a tactical planning exercise, he challenged her suggested approach with unusual intensity. "Your solution prioritizes speed over security, Jenkins. That's a good way to get your entire squad killed." Aria didn't back down. "Respectfully, sir. In this scenario, remaining static presents a greater risk than rapid movement to advantageous terrain. The enemy has superior numbers but inferior night vision capabilities." Foster's expression tightened. "You sound awfully confident for someone with zero combat deployments." "I'm offering an assessment based on the scenario parameters, sir. Not claiming combat experience I don't have." The exchange created a palpable tension in the room. Aria recognized that Foster was struggling with the shift in dynamics, from dismissing her as a quota filler to confronting her as a legitimate professional rival. It was a transition her mother had described in her journal, the uncomfortable phase, when male colleagues realized they could no longer dismiss female counterparts, and instead had to engage with them as equals. That evening, Aria received a message from Rodriguez, who was recovering well, but still weeks away from returning to duty. "Hearing interesting reports about you, Jenkins. They say you've stopped sandbagging. About time." Aria smiled at the message, appreciating Rodriguez's straightforward approach. His respect felt earned rather than granted, and his recovery represented tangible proof that her training had real-world value, beyond scoring points in training exercises. As Aria's true capabilities became more evident, the program's leadership took notice. Colonel James Richardson, the infantry school commander, requested her presence following a particularly impressive performance during a night land navigation exercise, where she'd located all points in record time despite challenging terrain and weather conditions. "Lieutenant Jenkins," Richardson said when she reported to his office, "Major Thompson tells me you're Colonel Sarah Jenkins' daughter." "Yes, sir." Richardson nodded thoughtfully. "I never had the privilege of serving with your mother directly, but her reputation extended well beyond her immediate command. She changed how the Army approached female leadership and combated adjacent roles. She believed in leading from the front, sir, as you demonstrated with Staff Sergeant Rodriguez." Richardson studied her with professional interest. "That incident has created quite a stir, Lieutenant. We've had inquiries from several specialized units about your training and capabilities." Aria maintained her composure, though internally she felt a familiar tension. Her mother had faced similar interest, the high performer who became a curiosity, a potential asset, a symbol. My focus is on completing the infantry officer program, sir. Understandable. But you should be aware that your options may be broader than you anticipated. Richardson leaned forward slightly. The Marine Corps is still adjusting to women in combat roles. Your performance so far suggests you could be instrumental in shaping how that integration proceeds. The implication was clear. Aria's success or failure would impact opportunities for other women. It was a weight her mother had carried throughout her career. The burden of representation that came with being among the first. Sarah Jenkins had embraced that responsibility, understanding that her individual excellence created space for those who would follow. Was Aria prepared to accept the same mantle? I'm aware of the broader implications, sir, she said carefully, but I believe the best approach is to focus on being an effective infantry officer first, a symbol second. Richardson nodded approvingly. Precisely the right priority, Lieutenant. Symbolic value means nothing without operational excellence to back it up. As Aria left the colonel's office, she felt the ground shifting beneath her feet. Be careful. Anonymity she'd cultivated was gone completely, replaced by heightened expectations and scrutiny from all directions. Some saw her as Sarah Jenkins' daughter, trying to live up to an impossible legacy. Others viewed her as a test case for women in infantry roles. Few seemed to see her simply as Lieutenant Aria Jenkins, an officer trying to serve effectively. Her phone buzzed with another message from Rodriguez. They're talking about you at levels way above my pay grade, Jenkins. Whatever happens next, remember who carried who for 10 miles. That wasn't your mother. That was all you. The simple affirmation struck Aria more powerfully than she expected. Throughout her life, she'd measured herself against her mother's extraordinary standard. Sarah's strength, Sarah's courage, Sarah's tactical brilliance. Even her decision to join the infantry had been partially motivated by a desire to honor her mother's barrier-breaking legacy. But carrying Rodriguez hadn't been about living up to Sarah Jenkins' example. It had been about Aria doing what needed to be done, using the training her mother had provided but applying it through her own determination and judgment. Perhaps that was the true inheritance from Sarah, not just the physical capabilities or tactical knowledge, but the uncompromising commitment to excellence regardless of obstacles. The willingness to be exceptional even when it made others uncomfortable. That night, Aria reread a passage from her mother's journal that had always troubled her. They will always find reasons to question your presence, your capabilities, your commitment. The only effective response is performance so exceptional it cannot be dismissed or explained away. Be too good to ignore. For the first time, Aria fully embraced the wisdom in those words. She had tried to navigate the system through careful moderation, maintaining low visibility while meeting standards. But her mother had understood something fundamental that Aria was only now grasping. In a system designed around male capabilities and expectations, mere competence from women would never be enough to change perceptions. Only undeniable excellence could transform the conversation. As she closed the journal, Aria made a decision. She would stop trying to manage others' perceptions and simply perform to her full capabilities. She would honor her mother's legacy not by hiding it, but by building upon it openly. If that made her a target for additional scrutiny or unreasonable expectations, so be it. Sarah Jenkins hadn't changed the military by playing small, and neither would her daughter. The transformation in Aria's approach became evident in every aspect of her training. During physical fitness tests, she pushed to her actual limits, setting new program records for women in several events. In tactical exercises, she demonstrated the innovative thinking her mother had instilled, offering solutions that often challenged conventional approaches. Rather than trying to blend in, she embraced her unique strengths: superior endurance over raw power, tactical creativity over brute force approaches, precision over aggression. Her fellow officers responded with a mixture of reactions. Some were inspired, pushing themselves harder to keep pace with her new standard. Others became more openly resentful, suggesting she was receiving special treatment because of her mother's reputation or the military's desire for female success stories. A few, like Captain Foster, seemed caught between admiration for her abilities and discomfort with having their assumptions challenged so thoroughly. "You're making waves, Jenkins," Foster told her after a training exercise where her team had outperformed all others, using unconventional tactics. Not everyone appreciates having their established methods questioned. Innovation comes from questioning established methods, sir, Aria replied. That's how we improve. Foster studied her for a moment. Your mother was the same way, wasn't she? Always pushing boundaries, challenging assumptions. She believed complacency was more dangerous than any enemy. That attitude made her both respected and resented. Foster's expression suggested he understood this dynamic from personal experience. Be careful you don't isolate yourself by always being the exception. Foster's warning lingered in Aria's mind as she prepared for the program's most challenging phase, a 2-week field exercise designed to simulate combat operations against a skilled opposing force. The scenario would test every aspect of infantry leadership, from tactical planning to physical endurance to decision-making under extreme stress. It was widely considered the true measure of an infantry officer's potential. The night before deployment, Aria reviewed her mother's journal entries about leadership under pressure. Sarah Jenkins had developed a philosophy that balanced tactical excellence with genuine care for those under her command, what she called compassionate competence. The military often emphasized the competence while undervaluing the compassion, but Sarah had understood that both were essential for leaders who needed to inspire their teams to perform beyond normal human limitations. Your soldiers need to know 2 things, Sarah had written: that you will never ask them to take risks you wouldn't take yourself, and that you will never leave them behind, no matter the cost. Demonstrate both, and they will follow you anywhere. As dawn broke over Camp Lejeune, the infantry officer candidates assembled for final briefings before moving to the training area. Each lieutenant would lead a squad of experienced Marines acting as infantry troops through a series of escalating challenges. Their performance would be evaluated by senior officers who would play the role of battalion command. This exercise separates the real infantry officers from those who simply wear the uniform. Colonel Richardson told them during the briefing, "You will be cold, hungry, sleep-deprived, and under constant pressure to make life or death decisions. Your people will look to you for leadership when everything is falling apart. How you respond will reveal your true character." Aria was assigned a squad of 12 Marines, including 3 who had combat deployments and 2 who had previously washed other candidates out of the program with their demanding expectations. As she introduced herself, she could read the skepticism in their expressions, another female officer trying to prove something, another test case they were expected to tolerate. "Lieutenant Tiny Tim," one whispered to another, unaware that Aria could hear him. Rather than addressing the comment directly, Aria gathered her squad and laid out her expectations with calm authority. "I believe in preparation, precision, and purpose. We will operate as a cohesive unit, leveraging each person's strengths. I expect your best, and you can expect mine." Questions. A staff sergeant named Ramirez, clearly the informal leader of the enlisted Marines, stepped forward. "With respect, Mum, we've heard you carried Staff Sergeant Rodriguez 10 miles after his injury. Is that true?" Aria met his gaze steadily. "It is." Ramirez nodded, something shifting in his expression. "Then I have no questions, ma'am. We're ready when you are." That simple exchange established a foundation of cautious respect that Aria knew she would need to build upon through consistent performance. As they moved into the training area and established their first patrol base, she made a point of checking in with each Marine individually, learning their backgrounds, experiences, and specialties, rather than trying to prove her physical capabilities. Immediately, she demonstrated her tactical knowledge and planning skills, developing an operation plan that incorporated their input, while maintaining clear command authority. The first 3 days proceeded without major challenges. Aria's squad successfully completed their assigned missions, navigating difficult terrain, establishing effective ambush positions, and maintaining security during movement. She led from the front without taking unnecessary risks, demonstrating the balance between courage and prudence that her mother had emphasized throughout her career. On the 4th day, everything changed. A sudden storm system moved in, bringing torrential rain and near-freezing temperatures that weren't part of the planned scenario. The exercise controllers considered pausing operations, but ultimately decided to continue, recognizing that real combat doesn't stop for bad weather. Aria's squad was midway through a long-range patrol when the storm hit, catching them in exposed terrain with limited cover options. The temperature dropped rapidly, creating genuine risk of hypothermia for Marines whose uniforms were soaked by the driving rain. "We need to establish shelter immediately," Aria ordered, already scanning the area for viable options. The nearest designated patrol base was 8 miles away, across increasingly flooded terrain. "There's a ridgeline to Clicks East," Ramirez suggested, pointing toward a tree-covered elevation. "Might provide some cover from the wind." Aria made a quick decision. "That's our best option." Torres, Dawson, take point. Everyone maintain interval and keep an eye on your battle buddy for signs of hypothermia. As they moved toward the ridgeline, the conditions deteriorated further. The rain turned to sleet, and the wind increased to near gale force, creating a wind chill that penetrated even the most weather-resistant gear. 2 Marines began showing early signs of hypothermia. Slurred speech, uncontrollable shivering, diminished Coordination, reaching the relative shelter of the tree line. Aria immediately organized her squad into shelter building teams, applying wilderness survival techniques that went well beyond standard infantry training. She demonstrated how to construct improvised shelters using ponchos, branches, and terrain features to create windbreaks and heat reflectors. Body heat is our most reliable resource, she explained, directing the Marines to pair up in the shelters. Rotate the outside position every 30 minutes so no one gets too cold. Working alongside her Marines rather than simply directing them, Aria helped establish a defensible position that balanced tactical security with survival needs. She organized a fire plan that would allow them to maintain security despite limited visibility, set up observation posts that provided cover from the elements, and established a rotation that ensured no Marine was exposed to the full force of the weather for too long. As night fell and conditions worsened, Aria maintained a constant presence, checking on each Marine, ensuring proper hydration despite the cold, and demonstrating small techniques for preserving body heat that most had never learned in standard training. "Where did you learn all this, Lieutenant?" Dawson asked as Aria showed him how to create a more effective windbreak using his pack and natural terrain. "My mother taught me," Aria replied simply. She believed in preparing for worst-case scenarios. "Your mother must have been one hell of a Marine. Army, actually." Colonel Sarah Jenkins. Recognition flickered in Dawson's eyes. "The Iron Lady, she's your mother." Aria nodded, continuing her work on the shelter. She passed 2 years ago. "My first platoon sergeant served under her in Iraq," Dawson said, his respect evident. Said she was the toughest officer he'd ever met, but also the one who cared most about her soldiers' welfare. She believed the two qualities were inseparable. Aria replied, "True toughness includes taking care of your people." As Aria moved through the squad's position, checking security measures and ensuring her Marines were rotating properly to prevent hypothermia, she found herself applying her mother's principles instinctively. Sarah had taught her that leadership in crisis wasn't about dramatic gestures, but about consistent attention to details that collectively meant the difference between success and failure, between life and death. By midnight, the storm had intensified beyond anyone's expectations. The exercise controllers transmitted an emergency message to all units. Weather conditions have exceeded safety parameters. Exercise temporarily suspended. All units seek immediate shelter and report status. Aria acknowledged the message but knew their current position offered better protection than attempting movement in the near-zero visibility conditions. Using her satellite communication device, she provided a detailed report of their location, shelter status, and the condition of her Marines, including the two showing mild hypothermia symptoms. The response came quickly. "Nearest emergency extraction point Echo 7. APPROXIMATELY for miles northeast of your position. Medical teams standing by for hypothermia cases." For miles in these conditions would be challenging even for Marines in peak condition. For those already showing hypothermia symptoms, it could be dangerous. Aria quickly assessed her options, weighing risk against necessity with the clear-headed precision her mother had instilled in her. "Ramirez, I need your assessment," she said, calling the staff sergeant into her shelter. "Can Torres and Alvarez make a 4-mile movement in these conditions?" Ramirez considered the question seriously. "Torres, maybe. Alvarez is deteriorating. His speech is getting more slurred, and he stopped shivering, which isn't a good sign." Aria nodded, having noted the same concerning progression. "We need to get him to medical care. I'm going to take him to the extraction point alone." Ramirez looked skeptical. "With respect, Lieutenant, that's a 2-person carry at minimum in these conditions. I've done it before." Aria said simply, "I need you to maintain command here. Keep everyone else safe and stable. Once I've delivered Alvarez, I'll return for Torres if his condition worsens." Ramirez studied her face, looking for any sign of uncertainty or bravado. Finding none, he nodded slowly. "If anyone can do it, Lieutenant, it's probably you. But we should at least try to contact command for a closer extraction." Aria attempted to reach command to request a closer extraction point, but the storm was now interfering with communications. They received only fragmented responses suggesting that Echo 7 remained their best option, as other routes were becoming impassable due to flooding. Decision made, Aria prepared for the evacuation. She created an improvised thermal wrap for Alvarez using emergency blankets and waterproof materials, constructed a carrying harness from ropes in her pack, and reviewed the route using her map and compass, identifying potential navigation challenges in the limited visibility. "Maintain position and security," she instructed Ramirez. "If conditions improve or worsen significantly, use the emergency channel." I'll check in every 30 minutes during movement. As Aria secured Alvarez in the carrying harness and lifted his substantial weight onto her shoulders, she saw the mixture of concern and amazement in her squad's eyes. Despite having heard about her evacuation of Rodriguez, seeing her prepare to carry their teammate through a raging storm created a new level of respect. "Be careful, Lieutenant," Torres said, his own condition stable enough that he could remain with the squad. "That's my best friend you're carrying." Aria nodded, adjusting the weight distribution. "I'll get him there. You focus on staying warm." And following Staff Sergeant Ramirez's instructions, stepping out into the full force of the storm, Aria immediately faced the brutal reality of her task. The wind threatened to knock her off balance with each gust. The sleet stung her exposed skin like tiny needles, and the terrain had become treacherous with mud and standing water. Visibility was limited to a few yards at best, making navigation a constant challenge. Despite her preparation, Aria fell back on her mother's training, breaking the journey into manageable segments, focusing on immediate challenges rather than the daunting whole. Each step became a deliberate act of will, each navigational check a victory against the elements. She established a rhythm of movement that maximized efficiency while minimizing energy expenditure, exactly as she'd done during the Rodriguez evacuation. An hour into the journey, Aria faced her first major obstacle, a creek that had swollen beyond its banks, creating a fast-moving water crossing where her map had indicated only a minor drainage. Carefully securing Alvarez, whose condition was continuing to deteriorate, she scouted along the bank until she found a narrower section, where fallen trees created a potential crossing point. The crossing required perfect balance and core strength, inching across slippery logs while carrying Alvarez's unconscious form, and maintaining enough awareness to adjust for the gusting wind. One misstep would send them both into frigid water that could prove fatal in their condition. Drawing on years of balance training with her mother, Aria moved with deliberate precision, testing each step before committing her weight, using her free arm for counterbalance, and maintaining constant awareness of Alvarez's position to prevent shifting that could throw them off balance. Reaching the other side, Aria allowed herself only a moment's rest before continuing. Alvarez's breathing had become increasingly shallow, his skin cold to the touch despite the thermal wrapping. The urgency of his condition drove her forward through deteriorating conditions, her own extremities beginning to numb from cold and exertion. At the 90-minute mark, Aria checked in with Ramirez as promised, her voice steady despite her exhaustion, approximately halfway to extraction point. "Continuing movement. Alvarez stable, but requires immediate medical attention upon arrival." "Understood, Lieutenant," Ramirez responded, the connection breaking up through the storm. "Squad holding position. Be advised, weather expected to worsen over next hour." The warning proved accurate as Aria pushed through the final miles. The storm reached peak intensity, with wind gusts strong enough to fell small trees and sleet transitioning to driving snow that accumulated rapidly on the already treacherous ground. Each step required increasingly conscious effort. Each navigational check demanded greater concentration as landmarks disappeared. Under the worsening conditions, despite the extremists, Aria maintained her focus with the single-minded determination that had characterized her mother's approach to seemingly impossible challenges. Sarah Jenkins had taught her that the human body's limitations were largely imposed by the mind, that with proper training and unbreakable will, those limitations could be transcended when the stakes demanded it. "The body is a tool," Sarah had told her during particularly grueling training sessions. "Like any tool, its effectiveness depends on the skill and determination of the one wielding it." As extraction point Echo 7 finally came into view, the dim glow of emergency lights barely visible through the storm, Aria had been carrying Alvarez for nearly 3 hours, through conditions that would have halted most military operations. Her uniform was frozen to her skin in places, her extremities had lost sensation, and every muscle screamed for relief. But she maintained her purposeful pace until she reached the medical team that rushed out to meet her. "Marine down, advanced hypothermia," she reported with professional precision as they transferred Alvarez to a medical litter. "Conscious when evacuation began. Lost consciousness approximately 90 minutes ago. Core temperature dropping steadily." Throughout transport, the medical officer stared at her in disbelief. "You carried him the entire way. Through this?" He gestured at the raging storm around them. "He's one of mine," Aria said simply, as if that explained everything. In many ways it did. As the medical team rushed Alvarez into the heated treatment tent, another officer approached Aria. "Lieutenant Jenkins, command has been trying to reach your squad. The exercise has been officially suspended due to extreme weather conditions. All personnel are being evacuated to base. My squad is still at our sheltered position," Aria replied, already calculating what would be needed for their extraction. 2 miles west of Checkpoint Delta along the ridgeline. One additional Marine showing early hypothermia symptoms. We've got vehicles preparing to move that direction. But the conditions are making it challenging. The nearest we can get is still about a mile from your described position. Aria nodded, understanding the implications immediately. I need to guide them in. My squad constructed improvised shelters that won't be visible from standard approach routes. The officer looked at her with concern. Lieutenant, you need medical attention yourself. You're showing signs of hypothermia and exhaustion. I'm combat effective, Aria insisted, using her mother's phrase for being functional despite injuries or fatigue. My squad needs extraction, and I'm the one who can lead your team to their exact position. After a brief medical check, that confirmed Aria was indeed still capable of functioning despite her condition. She joined the extraction team in their specialized vehicle. The return journey, even with mechanical assistance, proved challenging, as weather conditions continued to deteriorate, at the point where vehicles could no longer proceed. Aria once again took the lead, guiding the rescue team on foot through driving snow to the carefully concealed position where her squad had maintained security throughout the crisis. The expression on Ramirez's face when Aria appeared through the storm, with the rescue team told its own story, equal parts relief, amazement, and profound respect. Lieutenant, we thought. He trailed off, shaking his head. Alvarez. Receiving treatment, Aria confirmed. He'll recover. Everyone needs to move now. We've got transportation waiting. As the rescue team helped the Marines break down their position and move toward the vehicles, Ramirez fell in beside Aria. You came back for us. Of course I did, Aria replied. The simple statement carrying the weight of her leadership philosophy. We moved together or not at all. When they finally returned to base, the full impact of Aria's actions began to register throughout the command structure. What had started as a standard training exercise had evolved into a genuine survival situation, and her performance had gone well beyond the parameters of evaluation into the realm of authentic leadership under life-threatening conditions. Medical staff confirmed that Alvarez would have died from hypothermia without Aria's intervention. The speed and efficiency of her evacuation, despite the extreme conditions, had made the critical difference in his survival. But equally important was her decision to return for the rest of her squad, demonstrating the principle that her mother had emphasized throughout her career. Leaders never leave their people behind, regardless of personal cost. As Aria underwent treatment for mild hypothermia and exhaustion, Colonel Richardson visited her in the medical facility. Your actions during this crisis have been reported up the chain of command, Lieutenant Jenkins. Carrying a Marine through those conditions for that distance, it exceeds what we would expect from even our most experienced officers. I did what was necessary, sir. Richardson nodded, studying her with newfound respect. That's precisely what distinguishes exceptional officers from merely competent ones. The ability to recognize what's necessary and the will to accomplish it, regardless of the obstacles. He paused, then added, Your mother would be proud. The comment touched something deep in Aria, a place where the grief of losing Sarah still lingered alongside the desire to honor her legacy. Thank you, sir. Rest and recover, Lieutenant. We'll talk more about your future in the Corps when you're cleared by medical. After Richardson left, Aria was surprised by another visitor, Captain Foster, who had been observing the exercise. As part of the evaluation team, he entered her room with uncharacteristic hesitation. His typically confident demeanor subdued. Jenkins, he began, then seemed to reconsider his approach. Aria, I owe you an apology, sir. I've been watching you since the beginning of this program, convinced you were here to make some kind of political statement about women in combat roles. Foster met her gaze directly. I was wrong. What you did out there, carrying Alvarez through that storm, then going back for your squad, that wasn't about proving a point. That was about being an infantry officer in the purest sense. Aria nodded, accepting the apology without needing to verbalize forgiveness. Thank you, sir. For what it's worth, Foster added, I've submitted my evaluation report. I've recommended you for distinguished graduate status and immediate placement in a frontline infantry unit. The Corps needs officers like you leading from the front. The acknowledgement from Foster, who had been her most consistent critic, represented a full circle moment in Aria's journey from being dismissed as Tiny Tim to weak for the infantry, to being recognized as one of the program's standout performers based on demonstrated performance, rather than physical appearance or gender. Over the following days, as Aria recovered and the program resumed, she noticed a fundamental shift in how she was perceived. The nickname Tiny Tim had vanished completely, replaced by a new call sign that emerged organically from her squad. Atlas, the titan who carried the world on his shoulders. The name acknowledged both her physical feat of carrying Alvarez and the broader leadership burden she had shouldered during the crisis. More significantly, her fellow officers and the enlisted Marines began approaching her for guidance on everything from tactical planning to physical training techniques. Her unique approach, combining her mother's methodologies with her own innovations, was now seen as a valuable resource rather than an uncomfortable deviation from tradition. When Alvarez returned to limited duty 2 weeks later, he made a point of finding Aria during a training exercise. "Lieutenant," he said, standing in attention, "I never properly thanked you for what you did. The doctors said I had maybe 30 minutes left before it would have been too late. You're part of my squad, Alvarez. I wasn't going to leave you behind." "Permission to speak freely, Mom, of course. When they first assigned me to your squad, I thought it was some kind of joke. No offense intended. I couldn't imagine how someone your size could lead effectively in combat conditions." He hesitated, then continued with genuine emotion. "I've never been so wrong about anything in my life. There's nobody in this program I'd rather follow into actual combat." The simple statement, delivered with the straightforward honesty of an experienced Marine, affected Aria more deeply than any official recognition could have. It represented the true measure of leadership, the willing confidence of those being led, freely given based on demonstrated capability rather than imposed by rank or authority. As the final weeks of the infantry officer program approached, bringing with it decisions about unit assignments and future roles, Aria found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point. From hiding in her mother's shadow to carrying that legacy forward in her own unique way. From being dismissed as too weak for infantry to redefining what strength meant in a combat leader. Sarah Jenkins had taught her that true strength wasn't about physical size or brute force, but about the unbreakable will to do what was necessary regardless of obstacles or opposition. It was about carrying the burden of responsibility even when it seemed impossibly heavy. It was about ensuring that no one under your command was ever left behind, no matter the personal cost. And carrying Alvarez through that storm, Aria hadn't just saved a Marine's life. She had embodied the principles that her mother had lived by, transforming them from abstract lessons into concrete action. She had proven, beyond any possible doubt, that the measure of an infantry officer had nothing to do with gender size or conformity to traditional expectations, and everything to do with the capacity to lead effectively when lives depended on it. The Corps was changing, slowly and often reluctantly, but changing nonetheless. Aria's performance hadn't just secured her own place within it. It had helped create space for others who would follow, who might otherwise have been dismissed as too small, too different, or too female for roles that had traditionally been defined by male physical standards rather than actual leadership requirements. As Colonel Richardson had said, her mother would indeed be proud, not because Aria had followed exactly in her footsteps, but because she had found her own path, to embodying the same essential principles: strength with purpose, precision with compassion, leadership that carried others through the storm, no matter how heavy the burden might be. 3 weeks after the storm incident, Aria stood among her fellow officers at the infantry program graduation ceremony. The polished formation reflected months of shared hardship, collective growth, and individual transformation. For Aria, the journey had been particularly profound, from deliberately hiding her capabilities to fully embracing her potential, from being dismissed as Tiny Tim to earning the respect of even her harshest critics. Colonel Richardson addressed the graduates with the gravity their accomplishment deserved. "The infantry officer's path is distinct from all others in our corps. You don't just lead Marines, you lead them directly into danger, sharing every hardship, facing every threat alongside them. The trident you received today symbolizes not just completion of this program, but acceptance of that sacred responsibility." As Richardson called each graduate forward to receive their infantry officer insignia, Aria found herself reflecting on the unexpected turns her path had taken. When she'd first entered the program, her goal had been simply to honor her mother's legacy by succeeding in a combat leadership role. Somewhere along the way, that motivation had evolved into something more personal, a deep commitment to the Marines under her command and to redefining excellence on her own terms. "Lieutenant Aria Jenkins," Richardson announced, and a subtle but noticeable shift in attention rippled through the audience. Aria stepped forward with the precision and confidence that had become her hallmark, accepting the coveted infantry officer insignia with composed dignity. "Distinguished graduate," Richardson added, placing particular emphasis on the designation reserved for the program's top performers. "Lieutenant Jenkins has demonstrated exceptional tactical proficiency, physical capability, and most importantly, the decisive leadership required of infantry officers in crisis situations." As Aria returned to formation, She noted the presence of several high-ranking officers who hadn't been part of the standard training cadre. Their attendance signaled the unusual attention her performance had attracted, attention that would shape the next phase of her career in ways she hadn't anticipated. Following the ceremony, Major Thompson approached her with news that would set her future course. Lieutenant Jenkins, congratulations on your achievement. Colonel Richardson has asked me to inform you that you've been selected for immediate assignment to 1st Battalion, 6th Marines. Aria absorbed this information with measured excitement. 1st Battalion, 6th Marines was a storied infantry unit with a distinguished combat history, dating back to World War I. Being assigned there as a female infantry officer represented not just a personal milestone, but a historic step for the Corps itself. Thank you, sir. I'm honored by the assignment. There's more, Thompson continued. The battalion is deploying for a 6-month rotation to Eastern Europe in 3 weeks. You'll be taking command of 2nd Platoon, Alpha Company. The rapid deployment timeline was unexpected, but not unwelcome. Aria had trained for this moment throughout her life, first under her mother's guidance and then through her own relentless preparation. Leading Marines in an operational environment, even if not direct combat, would be the true test of everything she had learned. I'll be ready, sir. I have no doubt, Thompson replied, then added with uncharacteristic candor, your mother faced similar challenges when she took her first command, being the first woman in positions previously held only by men. She established her authority through unmistakable competence. I suspect you'll follow a similar path. Before Aria could respond, she noticed Staff Sergeant Rodriguez approaching, walking with a slight limp but otherwise fully recovered from the injury that had first revealed Aria's true capabilities to the training cadre. Their eyes met with mutual recognition of the journey that had brought them to this moment. From skepticism and dismissal to genuine respect forged through crisis. Lieutenant Jenkins, Rodriguez said, extending his hand, congratulations on your graduation and distinguished status. Thank you, Staff Sergeant. How's the recovery progressing? Well enough that I've been reassigned. Rodriguez replied with a hint of pride. I'll be joining 1st Battalion, 6th Marines as a platoon sergeant. Apparently, we'll be deploying together. The synchronicity wasn't coincidental, Aria realized. Someone in the command structure had recognized the unique dynamic between them, the skeptical senior NCO whose life she had saved, whose respect she had earned through demonstrable action rather than rank or authority. Such relationships formed the backbone of effective combat units. 2nd Platoon, Alpha Company by any chance? Aria asked, already anticipating the answer. Rodriguez nodded, a slight smile revealing his awareness of the deliberate pairing. It seems someone thought we work well together. Or they recognize that you'll keep me honest, Aria suggested. Having someone who's seen both my strengths and limitations will be invaluable in a new command. I'll certainly try, ma'am. Rodriguez's tone conveyed that their relationship had evolved into something approaching partnership, though still bounded by the necessary formality of rank. You're becoming a symbol whether you intended to or not. Aria received this information with characteristic thoughtfulness. Her mother had navigated similar territory, being both an exceptional individual leader and a reluctant symbol for broader institutional change. Sarah had always emphasized that the former must precede the latter. Symbolic value meant nothing without operational excellence to justify it. Being a symbol wasn't my goal, Aria replied. I just wanted to be an effective platoon commander. With respect, Mum. You stopped having that choice the moment you picked up Rodriguez in that storm. One of her squad leaders interjected. Some actions change how people see you permanently. The congressional briefing took place at the battalion headquarters with senior leadership present alongside the visiting delegation. Aria delivered her assessment of border security operations with the precision and clarity that characterized all her communications, detailed without being overwhelming, confident without being arrogant, technically accurate while remaining accessible to non-military audiences. When the questions turned to her personal experience, as one of the Marine Corps' first female infantry officers, Aria navigated the potentially political topic with remarkable diplomacy. My experience has reinforced what the Corps has always known, that leadership effectiveness is determined by character, judgment, and commitment rather than any specific physical attribute, she stated. The standards exist to ensure all infantry officers, regardless of gender, can perform under the most demanding conditions. Those standards should neither be lowered to increase representation, nor artificially elevated to exclude qualified candidates. One congresswoman asked directly about the incident that had earned Aria her reputation, carrying Staff Sergeant Rodriguez 10 miles through a storm. That story has spread throughout the military community. Some suggest it represents extraordinary individual heroism. Others see it as proof that women belong in combat leadership roles. How do you view it? Aria considered her response carefully, aware of its potential impact beyond her individual career. I view it as a demonstration of what proper training and absolute commitment can achieve, regardless of gender. My mother, Colonel Aria Jenkins, instilled in me that physical limitations are largely mental constructs. With proper technique and unwavering determination, the human body can accomplish far more than conventional wisdom suggests. The lesson isn't that women can carry wounded men through storms, she continued. It's that effective leaders find ways to accomplish the mission regardless of obstacles. Sometimes that means carrying a wounded Marine when no other options exist. Other times it means making difficult decisions under pressure, as my platoon did during the border confrontation. The common thread is absolute commitment to your people and your mission. The response resonated with both military leadership and congressional representatives, reframing the discussion away from gender politics toward fundamental leadership principles. By connecting her physical feat to broader concepts of mission accomplishment and care for those under her command, Aria had elevated the conversation beyond simplistic narratives about women in combat roles. Following the congressional visit, Aria returned to her platoon's operational tempo with the same focused professionalism that had defined her command style. If anything, she seemed more determined to ensure that the attention she'd received didn't create distance between herself and the Marines she led. The spotlight can be isolating, she told Rodriguez during a rare moment of reflection. My mother warned me about that. How being singled out can separate you from the unit cohesion. That makes everything work. With respect, Lieutenant, that's not happening here, Rodriguez replied. The platoon takes pride in your recognition because they see it as validation of what they're part of, not just about you personally. This perspective was confirmed during a particularly challenging training exercise with Special Operations Forces from allied nations. Aria's platoon was selected to demonstrate Marine infantry tactics against elite counterparts, creating a high-pressure scenario where national pride and unit reputation were at stake. Throughout the exercise, Aria led from the front, demonstrating the tactical creativity and physical endurance that had become her trademark. But what impressed the international observers most was the seamless coordination of her entire platoon. The way her leadership style had created a unit that functioned as a cohesive whole rather than a collection of individuals. Your Marines move like they share one mind, commented a senior officer from a partner nation. That level of coordination usually takes years to develop. Lieutenant Jenkins creates an environment where everyone understands both the mission parameters and each other's capabilities, Rodriguez explained. No one gets left behind, literally or figuratively. As the deployment entered its final weeks, Aria received notification of her next assignment, one that would shape not just her career, but potentially the future of the Marine Corps itself. Following her successful platoon command, she was being selected for a specialized role developing advanced infantry training protocols that would apply lessons from her operational experience to the broader force. They're creating a position specifically for you, her battalion commander explained. Your unique background and demonstrated performance make you ideally suited to help evolve how we train infantry leaders for modern operational environments. The assignment represented official recognition that Aria's approach, blending her mother's methodologies with her own innovations, had value beyond her individual performance. It was an opportunity to influence the development of future infantry officers, both male and female, ensuring they were prepared for the complex challenges of modern warfare. Your mother revolutionized how the Army approached female leadership in combat-adjacent roles, the commander noted. You have the opportunity to do the same for direct combat leadership in the Marine Corps. As Aria prepared for the battalion's return to the United States, she took time to write personal evaluations for each Marine in her platoon, highlighting specific strengths and contributions with the detailed attention that had characterized her leadership style. These weren't perfunctory administrative requirements, but thoughtful assessments that could shape career trajectories. During her final patrol along the contested border, that had been their operational focus for 6 months, Aria found herself reflecting on the journey that had brought her to this point, from being dismissed as Tiny Tim to weak for infantry, to commanding a platoon in one of the Marine Corps' most storied battalions, from carrying Rodriguez through a storm to influencing how the entire Corps would train future combat leaders. Her mother had always emphasized that true strength wasn't about physical size or conformity to traditional expectations, but about the unwavering will to accomplish the mission while caring for those under your command. It was about carrying the burden when necessary, whatever form that burden might take. As the sun set on her final day in operational command, Aria gathered her platoon for a brief but meaningful address. 6 months ago, most of you had never served under a female infantry officer. You had questions, doubts, perhaps concerns about whether I belonged in this role. She paused, looking at the faces of Marines who had transformed from skeptical subordinates to trusted teammates during their shared challenges. Those questions were valid. Any new leader must prove themselves through performance, not promises. You deserve nothing less than absolute competence, an unwavering commitment from your platoon commander. What I hope you take from our time together isn't just that women can serve effectively in combat leadership roles, but that effectiveness in those roles has nothing to do with gender, and everything to do with preparation, judgment, and absolute dedication to the Marines under your command. Rodriguez, standing at the formation's edge, nodded almost imperceptibly, the veteran NCO's quiet acknowledgement that she had indeed demonstrated those qualities throughout their deployment. The Marine Corps is evolving, Aria continued, adapting to new operational realities while maintaining the traditions and standards that make us who we are. Being part of that evolution has been the greatest honor of my life. As the formation dismissed, several Marines approached to shake her hand, a gesture of respect that transcended the typical formality of the officer-enlisted relationship. The most meaningful came from a young corporal who had been among the most openly skeptical. When Aria first took command, permission to speak freely, Mom, of course. When you first arrived, I told my buddies you wouldn't last a month, that the first real crisis would prove women don't belong in infantry leadership. He met her gaze directly. I've never been more wrong about anything in my life. Whatever comes next in your career, I hope someday my daughter has the opportunity to serve under officers like you. The simple statement, delivered with the straightforward honesty of a Marine infantryman, represented the true measure of Aria's impact, not just on military policy or gender integration, but on individual perceptions about what leadership could look like in its most demanding forms. As Aria Jenkins prepared to return to the United States and begin her new role shaping the future of infantry training, she carried with her not just her mother's lessons, but the lived experience of proving that the strongest leaders aren't always those who look the part in traditional terms. Sometimes they're the ones willing to carry others when no one else can, to shoulder burdens that seem impossible, to demonstrate through action rather than words that no one gets left behind. They had called her too weak for the infantry until she carried her wounded commander 10 miles through a storm. But her true strength had never been about physical capability alone. It had been about the unwavering commitment to her Marines, the unyielding determination to accomplish the mission, and the absolute refusal to accept artificial limitations on what leadership could look like in its most essential form. In that, she had not just honored her mother's legacy, she had extended it, creating her own path forward while opening doors for those who would follow, not as symbols or exceptions, but as Marines and leaders, judged by their performance rather than their appearance, valued for their capabilities rather than constrained by conventions. The burden of being first had been heavy, but Aria Jenkins had proven beyond any doubt that she was strong enough to carry it, and to help others find their own strength along the way. Up next, you've got some more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.